The cabinet was sold to me as an 18th century find. I picked it up in my own shop, ran my thumb along the joint under the drawer, and in less than a minute, I understood something. I wasn't holding an antique. I was holding the beginning of the end of everything I'd built. And here's the part that still keeps me up some nights. I spotted somebody else's fake in 3 seconds flat. My own blindness took me 3 years to see. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Glad you're here for another one. Drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from tonight. I know we got folks out in Ohio, Texas, up in Michigan, some of you out on the West Coast working the night shift and listening on your break. However you found this channel, stick around, because tonight's story is a personal one, and it took me a long time to be able to tell it without my hands shaking. This is the story of how I found out the man I trusted more than my own family had been quietly taking my life apart, one invoice at a time, for 12 years. Let's get into it. My name's Harry. Harold, if you want to get formal about it, but nobody's called me that since my mother passed. I'm 63 years old, and I've spent 27 of those years restoring old furniture out of a shop just outside Lancaster, Pennsylvania. If you don't know the area, it's Amish country, rolling farmland, a lot of old money hiding behind plain barn doors. People bring me pieces that have been sitting in attics for 100 years, and I bring them back to life. Chairs, dressers, hutches, the occasional grandfather clock. It's slow work. It teaches you patience, and it teaches you to trust your hands over just about anything else, because wood doesn't lie to you. People do. I just didn't know that lesson applied outside the workshop until it was almost too late. I started the business back when I was 36, working out of a one-car garage with a space heater and a stack of tools I'd bought secondhand. It took me a decade to build it into something real. A proper shop, a small crew, a reputation good enough that folks from Philadelphia and even New York started shipping me pieces to work on. 12 years ago, I brought on a partner. His name was Stuart Page. Younger than me by about 10 years, sharp dresser, sharper talker. He didn't know the difference between mahogany and maple when I met him, but he knew how to walk into a room full of collectors and investors and make them feel like they were his oldest friends. I handled the wood. Stuart handled the people. For a long time, I thought that was the perfect setup. I want you to understand something before I keep going. Stuart wasn't some cartoon villain twirling a mustache. If he had been, I probably would have caught on years earlier. He remembered my late wife's birthday every single year without me reminding him. He showed up at my son's college graduation with a gift that actually meant something. He'd sit across from me at the diner on Main Street drinking bad coffee, laughing about our worst customers, and I'd think, this is a good life. This is a man I can trust with everything I've got left. He was good at the parts of the business I never wanted to deal with too. Trade shows, insurance paperwork, the endless back and forth with suppliers up in Reading and down toward Baltimore. I'd hand him a stack of invoices and never think twice about it, because that's what a partnership is supposed to look like. You cover my blind spots, I cover yours. He used to joke that between the two of us we made one complete businessman, him with the mouth, me with the hands. I laughed every time he said it. Looking back, I think he meant it a little differently than I did. There was a moment, years before any of this really started, that I think about differently now. We were closing up on a Friday, and Stuart mentioned kind of offhand that he sometimes felt like the shop would always have my name on the door no matter how much of the actual grinding work he put in. I told him that wasn't true, that this was a partnership, 50-50, and I meant it. He smiled and dropped it. At the time, I thought it was just a tired man venting after a long week. Now I wonder if that was the first small root of something that had been growing in him a lot longer than I ever gave him credit for. My son Dylan is 29 now. Good kid, works in insurance out in Harrisburg. But Dylan and I have never been what you'd call close, not since his mother passed when he was 17. I threw myself into the shop after that, maybe too hard. Dylan always thought I cared more about walnut veneer than I cared about him, and honestly, Some years. He wasn't wrong to think it. Stuart filled a gap there too, in a strange way. He and Dylan got along like old buddies, talked sports, talked politics, the kind of easy conversation Dylan and I never quite managed. I used to be grateful for that. Later, I'd understand it a little differently. The first crack showed up on a Tuesday morning, though I didn't know it was a crack at the time. Martha Kowalski does the books for my shop. She's worked for me 11 years, sharp as a tack, doesn't miss a decimal point. She came into my office holding an invoice for a set of dining chairs, and she had that look on her face, the one where she's already decided something's wrong, but she's trying to be polite about telling her boss. "Harry," she said, "this invoice doesn't match what's in the client file. The amount billed doesn't match what came in." I looked at it for about 10 seconds. $1,200 off. In a business that turns over a few $100,000 a year, that's the kind of number you can talk yourself out of worrying about. "Probably a typo," I told her. "Stuart handles the client-facing invoices. I'll ask him." I did ask him. And here's where I want you to understand how deep this went, because Stuart didn't just shrug it off. He had an answer ready, smooth as anything, something about a discount he'd given a repeat client for referring new business. I actually called the client myself, just to put my own mind at ease. And you know what? The client backed the story up word for word, confirmed it, no hesitation. I hung up the phone feeling like a fool for even doubting my own partner. Turns out that client had already been coached. I didn't know that yet. I just knew I felt relieved, and relief is a hell of a drug when you badly want to believe something. A few weeks after that, Dylan came by the shop for a Sunday visit, which was rare enough on its own. Stuart happened to be there too, going over some numbers with Martha, and at some point the conversation turned into me questioning one of Stuart's decisions about a client contract. Nothing dramatic, just a disagreement. Dylan surprised me by jumping in on Stuart's side, hard. "Dad, maybe it's not always Stuart," he said. "Maybe it's that you second-guess everything and everybody, and then you wonder why people pull away from you." That one landed. I won't lie to you. It landed because there was a grain of truth buried in it, and Dylan knew exactly where to plant it. I didn't have a good answer for him that day. I just went back to sanding a table leg and let the silence do the talking, the way I always did. Martha didn't let it go, though. That's the thing about Martha. She's not the type to raise her voice, but she's also not the type to back down from numbers that don't add up. Over the next several months, she kept finding small things. A supplier invoice that came in higher than what got recorded. A shipment logged as damaged and written off that she was pretty sure had actually gone out the back door to a paying customer. Each time, she brought it to me. Each time, I found a reason not to look too hard. Finally, she came into my office, closed the door behind her, and said the words that should have woken me up a lot sooner than they did. "Harry, I need you to actually listen to me this time, or I'm going to have to think seriously about whether I keep working here. I've laid it all out for you 3 separate times now. If you're not going to look at what I'm handing you, I can't keep being the only one who's worried about it." That scared me, not because of the money, but because Martha threatening to walk was about the most serious thing I'd heard in months. So I told her I'd look into it properly. And I did, sort of. I went through a batch of receipts myself, found one small discrepancy involving a supplier discount Stuart hadn't logged correctly, brought it to him, and he owned up to it right away, called it a paperwork mistake, apologized, said he'd tighten things up. I felt like I'd finally done my due diligence. I felt, honestly, a little proud of myself. Case closed, I thought. Crisis handled. I had no idea I'd just caught the smallest possible piece of something enormous, and that catching it had made me feel safe enough to stop looking any further. That false sense of relief lasted about 6 weeks. Then a client named Robert Callahan walked into my shop, a man who'd bought a restored writing desk from us the year before, and he mentioned, almost in passing, an order for a matching bookshelf he said he'd placed through Stuart's new place. I told him he must be mistaken, that all our work went through this shop, one location, one name on the door. He pulled out his phone and showed me a text thread with Stuart, an address for a shop called Page and Company Fine Furnishings, over in a strip of retail space near a fritta I'd never heard of. My stomach dropped in a way I still remember clearly. A shop with his name on it. A shop I knew nothing about. I didn't say much to Callahan. I thanked him, told him I'd look into it, and once he left, I sat in my office for a long time, just staring at the wall. That night, I didn't go home. I told my crew I had paperwork to finish, waited until the shop was empty, and went through every filing cabinet, every drawer, every box of old invoices we had. I felt like a burglar in my own building. I found shipping manifests with quantities that didn't match what we'd billed clients for. I found a folder of correspondence with a supplier out of Reading that I didn't recognize. I found a lease agreement dated almost 3 years earlier for a commercial unit under the name Page and Company, with Stuart's signature on it and nobody else's. I didn't sleep that night, and I didn't go straight to Stuart with it either, which surprised even me. Some part of me, the part that had ignored Martha 3 times already, wanted more than one man's paperwork before I blew up 12 years of partnership. So the next morning, I drove out to Ephrata myself, on my lunch break, and sat in my truck across the street from that strip mall unit. Page and Company Fine Furnishings, clean sign, nice lettering, a few pieces in the front window that looked an awful lot like work that had come out of my shop's back room. I didn't go in. I just sat there for 20 minutes, engine off, feeling something cold settle into my gut that had nothing to do with the weather. 2 days later, a woman came in wanting an old cherry wood cabinet appraised, one she said had been in her husband's family since the 1790s. Stuart had already looked at it, apparently, and told her it was worth a small fortune, worth restoring at a premium rate before selling it on. I took one look at the underside of the drawer, at the way the joints were cut, and I knew within a minute it wasn't from the 1790s at all. Modern machine work, dressed up to look aged, and underneath one drawer, a maker's stamp from a furniture outfit that had only been in business since the 2000s. I recognized the stamp because I'd seen it on a few pieces that had come out of a shop over in Ephrata. Stuart's shop. That's the moment I told you about at the start, standing there with that cabinet in my hands, feeling the truth settle into my chest like a stone. 27 years of reading wood grain and joinery, and I could spot a fake in 3 seconds. 12 years working next to a man, and it took me 3 years of warning signs to finally see what was right in front of me. I laid it all out on my workbench that night, the lease agreement, the manifests, the supplier correspondence, the fake cabinet, and I called Martha before I even called anybody else because she'd earned that. When she came in the next morning and I showed her everything, she didn't say I told you so, not exactly. What she said was worse in a way, because it was quiet and it was true. Harry, I brought you 3 separate warnings over the better part of a year. I'm not trying to rub your face in it. I just need you to understand that this could have been caught a long time before it got this big, if you'd been willing to look. I didn't argue with her. I couldn't. For the first time and longer than I want to admit, I understood that the real failure wasn't just Stuart's greed. It was my own refusal to see what was right in front of me, because looking meant admitting I'd trusted the wrong man, and some part of me would rather lose money than admit that. "Why do you think you didn't want to look, Harry?" she asked me, not unkindly. It wasn't a question I had a quick answer for. I sat there for a while before I said anything back to her. I told her something I'd never really said out loud to anybody, not even my late wife. Growing up, I was the middle kid out of 5 brothers, and I don't think my parents ever really saw me for much of anything. Not badly, not cruelly, just overlooked, the way a middle kid gets overlooked when there's an oldest to be proud of and a youngest to fuss over. I built this shop in part to finally be seen as good at something, as somebody worth paying attention to. And Stuart, for 12 years, made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt anywhere else. Maybe that's why I fought so hard not to look at what Martha kept putting in front of me. Looking meant losing the one place in my life where I finally felt like I mattered to somebody. Martha didn't have some tidy therapist answer for that. She just nodded and said, "That makes sense. It still doesn't mean you get to stop looking now." She was right, and I told her so. I apologized to her properly, for real, not the kind of apology you toss off to smooth things over. She accepted it. We got to work. Over the following weeks, we built out the full picture. Stuart had been quietly diverting a portion of our supplier orders and client billing into his own shadow business for at least 3 years, maybe longer. He'd take deposits on custom work, tell the client there'd be a slight delay, and complete the piece under the Page & Company name instead, pocketing the difference and never routing a dime back through our books. He used our reputation, our supplier relationships, and honestly, my name, to build a competing business right under my roof, using our own workshop hours to do half the labor. I didn't confront him, not the way you might expect from a story like this. There was no dramatic showdown in the shop, no shouting match with him packing up his desk while I stood there with my arms crossed. Instead, Martha and I quietly gathered every document we had, made copies, and I drove them myself to the county tax office and separately to the bank that had financed Stuart's equipment loan for the new shop, a loan he'd apparently taken out listing some of our shared equipment as collateral, equipment that legally belonged to my business, not his personal one. I also passed along what we had to 2 clients, including Robert Callahan, who I knew had been shortchanged. What happened after that happened mostly without me. The tax office opened an inquiry into unreported income. The bank came down hard on that loan once they realized the collateral situation was a mess and started demanding repayment on a timeline Stuart clearly wasn't prepared for. Word got around fast in a small industry like ours. Restoration and antiques is a tight community, and reputation moves through it like fire through dry grass. Clients started pulling away from Page & Conan before it had even properly opened its doors to the public. I told Dylan everything, sat him down at my kitchen table with the same folder of documents I'd handed the bank. I watched my son's face change as he went through it page by page. He didn't say much at first. Then he looked up at me and said, "Dad, I'm sorry. I really believed him over you." It wasn't some big movie moment. It was just quiet and honest, and it was more than I'd had from my son in years. We've talked more in the 2 months since than we did in the 2 years before that. About a month later, I was driving back from a supplier out near Ephrata, and I passed by that strip of retail space. Page & Company Fine Furnishings had a padlock on the front door and a notice taped to the glass. There was a truck backed up to the loading entrance, and 2 men were carrying out equipment I recognized, equipment that had come from my shop originally, now being hauled off under some repossession order. I sat in my truck at the red light for a minute, just watching. I thought I'd feel something like triumph. I didn't. What I felt was tired and a little sad, the way you feel watching something get torn down even when you know it deserved to come down. There was a period, right after everything came out, when the shop felt strange to walk into. Stuart's old desk sat empty for almost 2 months before I finally had the crew move it out to make room for a proper finishing station. A couple of longtime clients asked me straight out why I hadn't seen it sooner, and I didn't have a slick answer for them. I just told them the truth, that I'd been too comfortable to look, and that I was sorry it had cost some of them money and time before it got fixed. Most of them appreciated hearing it straight instead of some excuse. A couple didn't stick around, and I understood that too. Trust, once it's been handled carelessly, doesn't come back just because you want it to. I still run the shop. Martha's still with me, and if anything, we trust each other more now than we ever did before. Dylan comes by most Sundays. I've got a hickory sideboard on my bench right now. Came in from an estate sale over in Leaditz, and I'm working the old finish off it slow, 1 section at a time, the way I always do. Some things you can't rush. Some things you shouldn't have rushed past in the first place. These days, I can spot a fake piece of furniture in about 3 seconds flat, same as always. Took me a lot longer to learn how to spot the same thing in a person standing right next to me every single day. I'm working on that part too, slower going than the wood, if I'm honest with you. So here's what I want to ask you tonight, before I let you go. Have you ever had someone in your life you trusted so completely, you talked yourself out of every warning sign right in front of you? What finally made you see it? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one of them, and I know a lot of you have your own version of that cabinet in your hands somewhere. Thanks for sitting with me through this one. If you want more stories like this, you know what to do. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves out there.